Good day, class 9. Let us move on to 1.2. It says political radicalism and economic crisis. The birth of the Weimar Republic and the revolutionary uprising of the Spartacist League, it is pronounced as Spartacist League, grew side by side. In Russia, Soviets of workers and sailors were established in many cities. In Berlin, there were demands for Soviet style governance. Those opposed to this, like socialists, Democrats, and Catholics, were met in Weimar to give shape to the Democratic Republic. The Weimar Republic crushed the uprising with the help of war veterans called Free Corps. Later, the Communist Party of Germany was founded. Communists and socialists became enemies and could not make common cause against Hitler. Political radicalization heightened, that means reached its peak, by the economic crisis of 1923. Germany had borrowed large sums of money to fight the war and paid for the wrong done in terms of gold, which resulted in the reduction of gold reserves when resources were scarce, meaning less. In 1923, Germany refused to pay, and France occupied the Ruhr Valley, which was the leading industrial area. Germany retaliated and printed paper currency recklessly. As there was too much printed money, the value of the German mark fell. As the value began dropping by April, by August, the value of the mark was 4 lakhs, was in fact 4,621,000 marks. As the value of the mark collapsed, prices of goods rose sharply. Like, for example, it is given when people went to buy a loaf of bread, they carried huge sums of money just for bread. This came to be known as hyperinflation. What is hyperinflation? It is a situation when prices rise very high. Between 1924 and 1928, Germany saw some stability. How? Because the Americans bailed out Germany from the crisis by the Dawes Plan. What was this plan? This plan reworked the terms of reparation to ease the financial burden on Germany. But this plan was built on sand, meaning it could collapse any moment, any time. Short-term loans from the US saw German investments and industrial recovery. In 1929, the US withdrew this support as the Wall Street Exchange crashed. The people feared a fall in prices and made hurried efforts to sell their shares. On 24th October alone, 13 million shares were sold. This was the beginning of the Great Economic Depression. Between 1929 and 32, the national income of the US fell by half. What was the result? Factories shut down, exports fell, farmers were badly affected, and speculators withdrew their money from the market, which means that they stopped financing trade. The effects of recession were felt worldwide. The German economy was worst hit by this economic crisis. So let us find out how the German economy was hit by the Great Economic Depression. By 1932, industrial production was reduced by 40%. Second, workers lost their jobs or were paid reduced wages. The number of unemployed touched 6 million. What was the result of this employment? People with placards, and on these placards were written, willing to do any work. And they went about from place to place, looking for any kind of work to do. The unemployed youth played cards and sat at street corners or queued up at local employment exchange. Finally, when nothing came through and jobs disappeared, the youth took to criminal activities, and total despair became a common sight. So they had to feed themselves, they had to feed their families. And when jobs disappeared, they had no other alternative but to resort to criminal activities, especially robbing, snatching from people. The economic crisis created deep fear in people. The middle class, salaried employees, and pensioners saw their savings diminish when the currency lost its value. Small businessmen, self employed, and retailers suffered as their businesses got ruined. These sections of society feared being reduced to the ranks of the working class, or worse still, the unemployed, which means, please listen to the pronunciation, it is proletarianization, coming from the word proletariat, meaning the working class. And proletarianization, according to Marxism, is a social process by which employers or self-employed or even unemployed find themselves working as waged laborers. So in other words, proletarianization is a social process by which there is a downward movement in society. Employers become unemployed or waged laborers. Self-employed, the same thing. So it's a downward trend. This is what it means. This is what proletarianization means. Big businesses were in crisis. The peasants were affected by the sharp fall in agricultural prices. Women were filled with despair as their children faced starvation. The Weimar Republic was fragile, weak in the political field. There were some serious defects in the constitution. And the worst and the main defect was proportional representation. This made it impossible for one party to achieve majority. And when one party cannot get the majority and form the government and rule the country, then you have a coalition government. So proportional representation resulted in a rule by coalition. The second defect was Article 48. Now, what was contained in this Article 48 that made the Weimar Republic so fragile in the political field? It gave the president powers to impose emergency, suspend civil rights, and rule by decree. The Weimar Republic saw 20 different cabinets and a liberal use of Article 48. But there was no solution to the crisis. Therefore, people lost confidence in the democratic parliamentary system, which actually seemed to offer no solutions.